Hey everyone, welcome back to K-Korner, the channel where we dive into the wild world of entitled people and their unbelievable stories. Hope you enjoy it, and without further ado, let's go. So, this is an old incident from when I was 14 or so. Just a background, I lived in a colony that consisted of rows of buildings consisting of 4 little 2 BHK apartments, not that big as you think. The whole community was of lower middle class, but good, happy, and helpful people. The rows of buildings were in a triangle with a triangular park, just a patch of dirt, not the ones with trees and flowers. Now, the story. I used to play with some of my friends outside the houses when the older kids would be using the park for their cricket matches. Though we had space for our cricket and soccer matches, we still avoided the park as they used lather balls and the boundary walls of the park made us feel secure. One evening we were playing near a vertex outside my friend's house. A family had just moved into the apartment over my friends and had 2 kids like 8, 10 years old. Since we weren't actually playing any sports but our makeshift games, we let them join our game of running around and catching each other. When one of those kids got caught, he threw a tantrum and wailed with a storm siren. His mother came to the balcony and, without losing a beat, started screaming dirty profanities at us on how dare we make her son cry. We did not understand what it meant, but our friend Dan, name shortened, who was the neighbor of that EP and the one whose house we went to, understood everything and burst into a waterfall of tears and ran home. We understood nothing. To us it felt like she spoke in an alien language and it made our friend cry. We ran after him and he was crying bitterly, holding his mom. His mom gently asked us not to worry about him, and we can leave and Dan will be back to play tomorrow. The next day, we get to know that Dan's mom went to talk to the EP, and she told her that we hurt her precious son's knee when we pushed him. Dan's mom knew it wasn't true, but the kid had a bruise cut, so she didn't say anything more. She asked us not to interact with the AP's sons. The kid had no cut until we saw him. That day we went to the park to play soccer and had a fun time. The next day, we had to play outside the house, and there came those 2 hellspawns. We ignored them like ghosts, mostly because their mom was sitting on the balcony looking at us like a sniper waiting to shoot. While playing, one of our friends was hit by the hellspawn with a half brick. It hit his shin and turned blue, but no blood. He was in terrible pain, but not crying. The EP giggled at him. Dan shouted at her to keep her son in check. She replied with a, "Will you be beaten by a kid?" Dan, on cue, ran toward the kid to push him and Karen roared from the balcony, warning him not to touch the kid. The other kid then hit Dan with a stick on his back and she laughed again, but would spit fire if we came close to her kids. We went back home. The next day, we played outside the house and those hellspawns came with pieces of thick nylon ropes with a chain on knots on them. They were swinging them around and hitting us while the witch overlooked all from the balcony. We felt like we couldn't do anything. The kids started swinging their ropes at me and I just stood there absorbing the blows. I was a silent, shy kid back then who was bullied a lot. My other friends came to my rescue and pushed the kids away. They started swinging harder and Dan punched one square in the face. EP screeched and ran down the stairs and picked up the kid and ordered the other to hit us as much as he could, and we couldn't do anything as she would make sure we never walk again. We scrambled. I didn't tell anyone about my bruises. The next day, Dan's mom is in a terrible condition, evidently having cried for a long time. She was a single mom and was berated by the EP and her husband on how bad of a mother she is for being single and not teaching her son good things. They called her every bad word. She had called for her brother to come to her place. He arrived early in the morning of that day, and they both found weird spells tied on their door, windows, and Dan's bicycle support wheels. I don't know much about the spell chits, but they had tables and texts on them, and were said to be like curses or something. She asked Dan to play with us as she didn't want him to see the pain she was in. Surprisingly, the hellspawn didn't come out that day. But by the end of our playtime, a few people from the neighbors came to Dan's house to investigate Dan's mother as they were tipped that she was mistreating her kid. They stayed at the house till around 9 p.m., talking about stuff. The next day, Dan's mom thanked us for being Dan's good friends and asked us to play well with him before he goes to his grandma's. That day, the hellspawns came with a knife. Yes, a knife. And Karen was watching them. We stayed away from them and played in the park. Then, after 15 minutes or so, the hellspawns came to the park and one of them threw the knife at us, and it scraped the arm of one of our friends, scraping the skin on the surface, all while Karen was watching. The wound is not deep but is still bleeding. We ran to Dan's mom. The people in and nearby the park saw it all and gathered around the house. Our parents were called. The wounded kid's parents called the police. The police arrived at a house with at least 20 people standing in front of it and a Karen screaming profanities at everyone, claiming that the kid is lying to get her innocent son in trouble and that the wound was something that he inflicted on himself. She flooded the policemen with her lies that her children are innocent and we all were lying. There were no CCTV cameras back then, but the people gathered there were a sufficient number of witnesses, plus the still bleeding wound on the kid's arm. The EP was arrested and the husband was also picked up from his place of work. So several years ago, my friend, we'll call him Boris, and I would always help each other do the spring cleanup for our properties. This included taking out damaged trees, preparing garden plots, and taking care of our weed-infested yards. I was going to be first on the cleanup detail, so I prepared tools and implements the Friday before the big cleanup was to happen. Sharpening tools and chainsaw chains, lawnmower blade, and just getting everything in order. Among those tasks was mixing had with 2-cycle oil, finished up kind of late and generally put things away for the next day. The next morning, Boris shows up with coffee and biscuits around 8 a.m. As we were sitting on his tailgate enjoying breakfast, my neighbors ride by in their beat-to-hell Chevy Cavalier smoking like a freight train. We will call them Rocky and Bullwinkle. Boris and I made the usual jokes about the amount of smoke pouring from the exhaust. Damn, bet they go to the gas station and fill up with oil and check the gas. We soon finished breakfast and thought no more about it. As we begin to get the tools laid out and has out a plan of attack, I cannot find my gas cans. No mixed gas, regular gas, or a gas can in general. That's when it dawned on us why the car Rocky and Bullwinkle were driving was smoking so bad. I'm pissed to say the least. Well, all Boris and I could do was go shopping for gas cans, gas, and more 2-cycle oil. After we returned, we saw Rocky and Bullwinkle pass by several times. But all in all, we got a lot done. The next weekend we dedicated to clean up at Boris's. A weekend or two go by, and we have a family dinner at my wife's, Rocky and Bullwinkle's grandparents'. Toward the latter part of the evening, we were having a few drinks. Most people had left, and myself and wife's grandfather were shooting the breeze when I had to take a leak. As I was doing so, I saw a gas can with very distinct paint on it. I inquired from the old man about how it came into his possession, and he stated Rocky and Bullwinkle left it there. I simply explained it was mine as was another and loaded them in my truck. It ate at me every time that pa's car with my post neighbors went by, so I hatched a plan from a rotten egg. I went and bought a few gallons of gas, a few gallons of diesel fuel, and some other various oils. I made a concoction of these different chemicals and filled my new 6-gallon gas can I had to purchase. With some clean gas, I filled the lawnmower and cut some grass that evening, making sure Rocky and Bullwinkle saw me. Then I put everything away but forgot and left that rotten egg-ass can out. I got up and went to work the next morning and didn't even think to check on the can. But when I got home, I checked and it was gone. My wife informed me that my plan must have worked as she watched Rocky and Bullwinkle go in and out with the car, not only smoking, but spitting and sputtering as well. The last time they rode out, they didn't ride back in. They gave me about an hour of peace before they came over and wanted to know if I could look at the car and see what was wrong. If it could not be fixed on the side of the road, maybe tow it home. My response, I've had a long day and have a migraine. Maybe tomorrow. I saw the panic set in when I told them that. That's when they told me they had no insurance and it was on a main road. Tough luck. So, the highway patrol did run across it and had it towed. It was going to cost them around $500 to get it out of impound, plus they had to have current registration and insurance. Car wasn't worth it. Well, they're those type of people that good luck just falls on them, and the pastor for a local church gave them an old Furtaris. Took me a few cans of rotten egg gas, but I got the motor to lock up after about a month. This time it quit in their grandparents' yard. So, they scrapped it, and as luck would have it, they got their income tax returns. They bought a nice-looking Ford Phone 150, but it began having problems, too. Smoked really bad. They did take it to a mechanic that eventually found the problem. He got the truck running right again for about $1,500, and I've never had any more gas come up missing. So picture this, it's my day off, and I decide to take Zachary, my goofy Labrador, to the park for some quality chill time. I'm not a park regular, but hey, why not, right? I grab my iced coffee, a book I probably won't read, and leash up Zach. Off we go. We roll up to this park, swings, slides, kids screaming, the whole shebang. Zach's tail is practically wagging him off his feet. He's so ready to explore. I find an empty bench and settle in. Zach sprawled out beside me, his eyes glued to the kids going wild on the playground. Now, there's this dude sitting next to me, probably around my age, and he's lost in thought. Then, on the other side, there's this woman. Let's call her Karen, for reasons you'll soon understand. Buried in her phone, zero interest in anything around her. Kids are zooming all over the place, laughter in the air, and everything seems like a scene from a cheesy family movie. Just as I'm starting to get into my book, I spot something out of the corner of my eye. It's this little girl, can't be older than 6, perched at the top of the slide. And I don't know if you've seen a kid try to do something daft on a playground, but it's like they're testing the laws of physics or something. So there's this older kid, probably some playground Einstein, who says he dares the girl to jump from the slide to a swing. Yeah, you heard that right. Like a freaking superhero stunt. And before my brain can even process it, the dude next to me, let's call him Rescue Guy, he's up and flying toward that slide like a superhero. Dude dives, catches the little girl midair and lands on his back, cradling her like she's made of porcelain. She's okay, just a tiny scratch on her forehead, but she's bawling her eyes out and you'd think that's where the story ends, right? Well, hold on to your hats. Karen, who hasn't looked up from her phone till now, suddenly snaps to attention. Like a gazelle sensing danger, she's on her feet, rushing toward Rescue Guy. But she's not here to say thanks, or are you okay? Oh no, her opening line is more like, "Get off my daughter, you effing pedo." I kid you not. It's like the park turned into a soap opera set. Before Rescue Guy can even stammer a word, Karen goes full MMA and socks him in the throat. Throat punch. And she's still on her phone, calling the cops, "Stay where you are, you MF pedo. I'll get you arrested." So, there I am, Zach eyeing all the chaos like, dude, what's going on? I try to defuse the situation like, hey, he's just trying to help Liddy, but she fires back, stay out of it, weirdo. Well, she really doesn't pull her punches, both literally and figuratively. Finally, the cops roll in. Real-life backup has arrived, folks. They start questioning everyone, like they're solving some playground conspiracy. And me, I'm here trying to keep Zach from joining the circus and barking his head off at Karen. It's like doggy diplomacy. But here's the twist. I pipe up telling the cops what really went down. You know, how Rescue Guy is more like a human cushion than a predator. The story checks out, and the cops are all nods and got it. Karen, she's still steaming, glaring daggers at all of us, like we personally ruined her day. Then, out of the blue, Karen's phone prophecy comes true. Her husband arrives. This guy stomps over, all tough guy vibes, but the cops tell him to back off if he wants to avoid a one-way ticket to Trouble Town. And you can bet that Karen's not taking any of this lying down. She's still cursing the system, like the entire world's against her. Now, here's where things turn unexpectedly mild. Rescue Guy decides not to press charges against Karen. Yeah, the same Karen who almost choked him with her fist. He's all understanding, says he gets that she's scared for her daughter. I don't know, maybe he's secretly a saint or something. Just as tensions seem to simmer down, Rescue Guy's girlfriend or wife, whatever she is, shows up. And let me tell you, she storms in like she's ready to challenge Karen to a duel, but the cops are quick to assure her that the storm is mostly over. They give the green light for her and Rescue Guy to make their exit, so they peace out. Karen, well, she's not ready to give up the fight just yet. She's still cursing and fuming, but the cops are like, "Lady, we've had enough." Slowly but surely, the park returns to its normal, slightly chaotic state. I grab Zach's leash, mentally salute the rescue operation that turned into a daytime drama, and head home. And that, my friends, is the wild tale of how a regular day at the park turned into a roller coaster of accusations, throat punches, and unexpected heroes. Just another day in the life. I was working as a civilian with the U.S. military overseas, and I lived off base in an apartment complex popular among the U.S. military. One morning, I accidentally hit another soldier's vehicle. Upon exiting the vehicle, I noticed that both our vehicles were what you could call a hop tie. A hoop tie is an old car that is pretty beat up, that has been passed around from service to service member, and they generally sell for $1,000, $2,000. I also recognized that I was at fault for the accident. It was a very minor accident. His rear bumper was dented slightly, but I could hear both our cars still running. I approached the driver who had already gotten out, and he was in uniform, and I apologized and said if it was all right with him, I'd like to negotiate a payment that I will pay him in cash and we don't involve the authorities. I wanted to keep this simple. I'll be honest, the accident was so minor, I honestly expected him to say, "Nah, man, it's good, but even if he wanted some money, I'd have paid him." I have always been of the opinion that if you have a fender bender and can negotiate agreeable terms between both the parties, it's best to not involve insurance police. He told me he wanted to call the police. I said we could call the police or we could go on base together and I could give him $300. He said that wasn't enough. So I upped my offer to $500. He proceeded to punch me in the face. It was a sucker punch. He got into his car and took off and in the process nearly ran me over. Now I had a black box in my car which recorded everything. I went to the provost marshal office on base, police station, and reported the accident and the assault and showed the MP the footage. They used his license plate to track him down. I was also asked if I wanted to involve the local authorities and press criminal charges off base. Honestly, I felt like the soldier would learn his lesson if I let UMCJ, the military court basically, handle this, and I said not at this time. I was told it was an option. The end result was the soldier in question got 60 days of extra duty, reduction in rank, and forfeited a portion of his paycheck. Essentially, if he dealt with that, this would have been the end of the whole ordeal. Honestly, at this point, I assumed our little ordeal was over. A few days after his punishment was decided on, which was not long after the incident itself, I was in the commissary, grocery store on base, shopping when the soldier who assaulted saw me and began to insult me. I told him he needed to calm down, that he should learn his lesson. He told me I was a jerk who didn't know how to take a punch. I reminded him that I held back on destroying his life. He told me he's already been punished and I can't touch him again. He left me be. A store employee witnessed the entire encounter, and I got the employee's details and reported this interaction to his command. His commander told me he had been ordered to not interact with me and would take action. His commander also recommended that I involve the local authorities since the soldier obviously isn't learning his lesson. So I did. I contacted an attorney. The attorney was unsure if we could successfully sue the soldier and said he would need a cash payment to take the case. Honestly, I was mad and I wanted to teach this guy a lesson. I agreed it was not cheap, but I agreed. To keep this story short, we ended up in a court off base. We presented our evidence. The soldier in question had decided to represent himself. Several times in the court, he had outbursts. The judge ended up granting me a judgment of approx $50,000. When the judgment was given, the soldier called the judge son of B. So the judge changed his judgment to $80,000, and the judge then asked me if I also wanted to press charges against this soldier in criminal court. Honestly, it was obvious this guy wasn't going to learn a lesson. I told the judge I wanted to pursue criminal charges in addition to the judgment. My lawyer later advised me that if I ever wanted to see the money, I should pursue an international hold. With my judgment, it's likely that a judge would grant me an international hold. An international hold is basically where this soldier would not be allowed to leave the country until I was paid my $80,000. Also, he told me that, according to the agreement between the U.S. military and the host country, the U.S. military would honor the international hold. Basically, the U.S. military would not protect him or move him out of the country to avoid punishment. Honestly, by this point, I'd paid my lawyer thousands of dollars, and I honestly didn't feel like paying thousands of dollars and getting nothing for it. So I said, yes, I want to go forward with the international hold. About a month later, the international hold was granted, and the U.S. military was informed of this. 2 months after that, the criminal case was over, and the soldier was sentenced to 90 days in jail. By this point, the soldier had been moved onto the base into his barracks by his commander. I remember the day I was informed the MPs handed him over to the local authorities to begin his 90-day jail sentence. Did I mention he still owed me $80,000? I heard nothing for a year, and then one day I got a call from his commander. His commander wants me to make a statement in regards to the case. I go in and make the statement. During the statement, I found out the U.S. military was in the process of chaptering the soldier out of the U.S. military. The commander also informed me that he was close to coming up with the money to pay me so he could have the international hold lifted. He also asked me if my lawyer would be willing to make a statement. I contacted my lawyer, who also made a statement about the facts of the case. A few weeks later, his ex-wife contacted me. When this all started, I knew he was married. Guess his wife decided to divorce him. She informed me that her ex-husband had the money and needed the details on how to pay me. I provided her the details, and a few days later I got the payment and contacted his ex-wife to inform her I had been paid. She then asked me to send a receipt so he could have the international hold lifted and returned to the States. I asked her how he got the money. She said he maxed out his credit and also had family help out. Also during this conversation, I had found out the Army had chaptered him out of the military. I sent her the receipt, and that was the last I ever heard from his side. I took his $80,000 and bought myself a brand new car and used the rest of the money to put down on an investment property. Enjoying the stories yet? If you do, please subscribe, like, and comment. I live in California, USA, and when I was 20, my best friend, who we'll call Josie, got me a job working at a car wash with him. I can honestly say this was the worst job I've ever had and would not wish it on anybody. For context, Josie was an illegal immigrant at the time, and pretty much every worker there, aside from the jerk manager, who we'll call Tim, was an illegal immigrant as well. I myself am born and raised in the United States. I want to say, though, that all my co-workers were very nice people, aside from a couple of supervisors, just working hard to provide for their families and put their kids through school. Being that all the workers there were illegal immigrants, they were subjected to a lot of bad treatment, myself too, at the hands of Time. He is a total piece of trash, the type of guy who thinks he's better than everyone, dismisses things in a condescending way, plays innocent with customers when their cars get damaged somehow, and just outright verbally assaults you when he's frustrated. Definitely not manager material. Allow me to firsthand describe what it was like to work there, ladies and gentlemen, while also sprinkling in some personal encounters with Tim. We were not paid every hour. Instead, we sat on a bench, and only when a car came in and we were working on the cars were we paid. The supervisors would have us sit on the bench and take a break whenever there were no cars. We were not paid whenever we were on break. Instead, they kept a meticulous log for the exact amount of time you spent on your feet doing work and would tally that up at the end of the day and make you sign that you worked that many hours. So ultimately, for example, you could be there for 8 hours, but only get paid for 3 hours. I knew a bit about the labor laws and knew this was illegal. I was going to go to the Department of Labor about it, but Josie begged me not to because he was scared that if there was an investigation, that they would find out he and the others there were illegal immigrants and deport them. So I reluctantly, but understandably, did not pursue. On top of that, I didn't personally document anything myself regretfully, so I didn't feel like I would have a solid chance at suing them. To make up for the wages I should have been getting, I made sandwiches and burritos and sold them to the workers. I am a passionate chef who loves food. The manager eventually found out from the one drug addict supervisor that we had. This dude was Tim's little pet for every little thing. If we tossed food in the trash when we were cleaning out the cars, he would actually take it out of the trash sometimes and eat it. I wish I was making that up, but meth is a hell of a drug, I guess. Anyway, Tim confronted me about the food, telling me I can't be doing that, basically saying, what if one of the workers gets sick? To which I reply, I'm doing this to make up for the money that you should legally be paying me every hour. He didn't really have much to say to it and just kind of changed the subject. The health conditions of this place were atrocious, to say the least, and I would think with everything that I'm about to unload on you guys that me selling food would be the least of his concerns. They would have us use chemicals without gloves, even if the chemicals in question said to use gloves, and they kept all the vacuum hoses stored in the trash cans at the end of the night after using them for trash, so the hoses would all be covered in gunk 24/7. No equipment at that place was ever cleaned after use. It all just perpetually got dirtier and dirtier as the days would go on. One of my first days working there, I was horrified to see the conditions of the employee bathroom. There was no toilet seat, no hand dryer, no paper towels, no soap or dispenser, and the lockers were inside the bathroom as well. I would instead go to the customer restroom at first, which was entirely up to par, until Tim saw me coming out one day and asked me why I wasn't using the employee restroom, and that I couldn't use the customer restroom. I explained the condition of it, and his genuine response to me was that the employee restroom lacked soap because the employees would steal it, and to just go into the room where the car detergent for the automatic car wash is and dip my hands into there and wash my hands with that. Seriously, what kind of jerk managerial response is that? I was, and still am, genuinely dumbfounded that this jerk could possibly be a manager. I finally got fed up with that nonsense after only a couple of months and decided to quit. On the day I quit, I'm supposed to start early in the morning, and I decided to show up in the afternoon when it was busiest to make things more difficult for Time. I walk up and see him scrambling around working on cars in my place, grab his attention and hand him my uniform, letting him know that I quit. His response to me was that he hoped I didn't hate him despite everything. Seriously, dude? How could I not? I didn't feel completely better, even after quitting. So I decided that I wanted to get even, and that's where the revenge finally comes into play. A month after I quit, I was in the area shopping at a nearby mall and decided to go back to the car wash because I remember I had left my lock still on my locker and wanted to get it back. I go straight into the employee restroom without anyone noticing me and grab my lock. From there, I pull out my phone and start taking pictures of the condition of the restroom, and then I leave. Thankfully, with the blessing of Josie, I called Kalasha, which is basically the Department of Labor but for health-related things, and told them everything I possibly could about the health conditions there, and offered my pictures to them. They told me they would send someone out to investigate, and I just waited. I don't remember how long it took until they went, but Jose told me that someone from the Department of Health showed up unannounced one day and inspected the entire place, and Tim was at a loss for words because he knew he was screwed with all the violations they kept finding on the place. It was a citation goldmine for that health inspector. This ended up costing them tens of thousands of dollars in fines and repairs. Mind you, this is a small, independent business, so it definitely hurt their bank account. Thankfully, none of the illegal immigrant workers were exposed, but instead given safer and healthier working conditions in the end. Tim was still the manager there for a few more years, but after so many one-star reviews on Yelp with plenty of them mentioning him, that piece of trash finally got canned. As for me, I went on to finish culinary school and get an awesome job as a lead with amazing benefits, pay, and time off. Jose did extremely well for himself too, becoming a manager at a car dealership and is living his very best life as a legal U.S. citizen. We're still best friends after 17 years. Life is great, and I take satisfaction in knowing Tim will never amount to anything beyond that one 5-star rated car wash. Edit 1. I forgot to mention this story took place in January of 2012. To also add clarity as to why I was working that kind of job if I was able to afford a cell phone back in 2012. I was a college student for the 2 years prior to this story and was not working during that time. I was trying to find work anywhere I could, but I did not have any luck, and that's when my best friend was able to talk to one of the former supervisors and pull some strings for me. At that point, I was not going to be choosy and just wanted to start building experience to make it easier to find better jobs in the future. My only source of income was through financial aid for college, which was used for bus fare, school supplies, and any other school-related things. But you're only given a certain amount of financial aid during each semester. And I felt paying a phone bill might be risky in case my financial aid gets cut off or anything along those lines, to where I can't make the payment. My dad got me one of the early Samsung Android phones as a surprise because he genuinely just always wanted to help me, and I wasn't the type to ask him for anything. He told me he wanted to cover the phone bill for while I was still trying to better establish myself and get on my feet. This also made it easier to do homework and further job search, as I could do it straight off my phone or Wi-Fi tether my laptop, as we did not have internet in the house, until towards the end of 2012, sadly. Some years ago, I worked at a logistics facility, and leadership had a way of adding workload to middle management. Rarely did any of them last more than 3 years before they either got disillusioned or changed jobs somehow. After working the floor there for 2 years, I was promoted to a team leader, and after 3 years as team leader, I became shift leader, managing a shift of about 60 workers. We did pretty well. No other shift at this or other facilities could match our KPIs, and we did a lot of cross-training and on-the-fly adapting to the ever-changing needs of the company, current orders, and workflow. I found the work to be interesting and challenging until I got a new manager who bent towards micromanaging. It didn't take long before he wanted me to write a detailed log of how I spent my days. I told him this was a really bad idea, but if he wanted this, I would of course comply. The first week I accounted for every 30 minutes with a line or two, thinking this was enough of a waste of time. But I was soon informed of my mistake. New boss wanted more details and every 15 minutes accounted for. Again, I told him this wasn't smart, but I got overruled. The next week I made sure to write 4 or 5 lines for every 15 minutes of the workday, like writing down the names of the workers who took the early lunch and who took the later lunch. I wrote the same lines for every 15 minutes if the task took more than 15 minutes and so on. To his credit, he actually followed up on a few things the first 3 weeks, and if he had kept doing that, I wouldn't have complained much. But, of course, he gave up after a couple of weeks. I noticed this when I made a reference to one of the follow-ups and how we had failed that specific metric for a good reason, but never heard anything from him. So from then on, I suspected he had stopped reading my logs. Cue malicious compliance. After keeping the logs honest for a few weeks more, I felt secure that he never read them. I started adding a few tidbits of my own making. At first, it was a line telling him that if he used a certain phrase when talking to me the next week, I'd buy him a soda. He never used any of the phrases and thus never got free stuff. An example of a phrase could be pineapples are best served hot or apples are sweeter than oranges general statements, but unlikely to pop up randomly in conversations. Boss still claimed he read every single one of my reports and ridiculed me for claiming it was a bad idea. As the weeks went on without having to pay up, my malicious compliance kept getting bigger and bigger. Eventually, I promised him $100 in cash if he would talk to me about a specific picking location in our facility during the next week. He didn't, but of course I also started writing many relevant things into the logs, like questions for him on how to solve potential problems, telling him he needed to start planning for vacations well in advance of the holidays and such. Still no response in any way, shape, or form. If he really did read them, why not use them to get questions and potential problems on the record? So after a year of writing logs that were never read and hadn't been opened since I saved them in the assigned folder, our great leader got himself into some trouble and tried to shift the blame onto his underlings. We didn't appreciate that, especially when the cause of the trouble was written in clear text in these logs from the very first moment we discovered there might be a problem, all the way up to where it was an ongoing hindrance that cost us more and more time and money every week. Eventually, a big meeting was called with all U.S. foremen, team leads, shift leads, and middle managers, with several big brass observing our boss trying to fix the situation. Whenever he went for one of my people, I stood up for them and told them I took the responsibility for the entire shift. There was no need for him to call out my people because I was there, and it was my responsibility. A gleam in his eye told me he was about to make me the scapegoat, and I sat there calmly while he tore me a new one. He didn't hold back and really gave me his all to such an extent that several of the big brass started stirring uncomfortably. They could probably sense he was overplaying his hand. After the tirade petered out or he had run out of steam, I asked him if he was done. And if he was done, if I could reply, he agreed and leaned back in his chair, confident in his characterization of me. I took out my laptop, connected it to the big screen, so that everyone could see and open the folder where my logs were saved. I pointed out that they hadn't been opened in a while and that track changes had been activated and no changes had been logged by his user. My user was the only one that had made the logs, edited them, and saved them. I then went on describing the log entries where the problem was discovered, how we tracked its development and maturation into the big problem it was today. One of the best moments was when I could show everyone that we had, in fact, suggested several solutions to the problem many times. I'd also logged that we had several meetings discussing the problem, its causes and probable solutions, sometimes even directly asking my manager what he thought about them. There were logs that showed we had told him about this problem many times in many ways, but no logs of any solutions or response from him. I was so focused on the presentation, I didn't really look at my boss, but when I was done, I glanced up at him and I can safely say I've never seen a face more angry than his. He was furious. But of course his boss and his boss's boss was there right next to him, so he couldn't do much. His boss asked him if he had anything to say for himself, but he didn't really. He claimed I had edited them later and filled in details not known at the time of writing, but he was obviously reaching for anything to save himself. One of the big brass asked about a phrase he had seen, "What's so special about it picking locations?" I told them all about my little joke and how my boss had missed getting tens of free sodas and probably $400 if he had merely said the magic words each week. Amidst general laughter, I was told to leave the meeting along with anybody my pay grade or lower. 3 hours later, some security guy emptied his office of his personal belongings as he got fired, and 2 weeks later, a new boss arrived from another facility. This new boss and I had a great relationship where he left me and my shift mostly alone, and we kept topping out KPIs for the rest of my time in that company. This is fresh from last evening. I was on the last flight of a long trip and ready to pass out for 2.5 hours. That changed when my seatmate thumped into his spot. Let's call him Bill. Bill is in his 60s and speaks about 5 decibels too loud. His tablet font is so big the guys in air traffic control can probably read it through the plane window. Bill settles in and begins watching videos on his tablet while the flight attendants do the pre-flight demonstrations. The videos are far-right politics on nature, and the sound on the tablet is maxed. The flight attendant tells Bill, "You'll need to wear headphones or earbuds or put that on mute, sir." At first, it seems like Bill complies. The sound is off, and we get into the air. When we reach flying altitude and the Wi-Fi comes on, He's back on YouTube with his videos at full volume. The flight attendant rolls his eyes and repeats he will have to put on headphones or mute. Bill sits up straight and exudes obstinate entitlement. I can't wear headphones. They hurt my ears and I'm not missing the debates. You will have to mute it and put captions on so you don't disturb the other passengers. With a smug smirk, Bull says it's his right to watch the debates, and this is the only way he can. If anyone else hears, they should be listening as voters and learning. The flight attendant gives Bill a long look and returns to the front of the plane. 2 minutes later, an announcement was made that due to electronic issues, the Wi-Fi won't be available on this flight. Bill huffed and puffed about this and complained bitterly to his wife. He was snoring most of the flight, and the attendant told him to bring his complaints about no Wi-Fi to the ticket counter. 2 policemen were hanging out there as I passed. I hope they were there to educate Bill on flight rules and the consequences of not following them. Thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more captivating stories. Share your own experiences, opinions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay tuned for more epic tales.